We're talking about heroes versus villains, and the whole question is, which one are you? You may think you're a hero, and you may find out that you're not doing that much well for God. Or you may think, oh my goodness, I'm an awful villain, but you know what? You're really doing some good things. If you listen to some of the qualities that some of these people have. Some of these heroes are always heroes, and there are people in the Bible, nothing negative is said about them. Every situation they get into, they come out with grace. They show holiness. They show righteousness. And in the end, God blesses them and raises them up. We've got people like that. And we've got the other side also, that not a single good thing can be said about them. Some of the old kings of Israel, and they followed the ways of their father, and they brought in the Asherah poles, and they worshiped the gods of their wives' nations, and all these awful things. Can you imagine being written about in God's Word for thousands of years to be heard of a person who is totally everything against God? What an awful, awful way to be. Then there's those people that, depending on the day, is depending on if they're a hero or a villain. And I hope that for the most part, when you'll find out that a hero will get themselves out of that. They will look back up to God and say, how did I get here? Please let me not do this again. Lord, please restore me. That's what makes a good hero, because we're all going to have those times when we're down. We're going to have those times that we're mired in the mud and we can't get out. And the only way that we can do it is, Lord, please help us and help me get out of this. And He grabs you out and puts you back on nice dry land. But that's a hero. You understand your position. You understand where you are, how you've gotten off track, and you'll work your way back. Don't be the one that just sits here and you're just kind of happy in the wallowing in like the pigs would in the mire. That's not a hero for God. And you're not going to be able to do great things for Him by being that kind of person. So we're wrestling with these great figures of the Old Testament. And sometimes the New Testament. We'll bring in some new ones. I think next week we start with a few new ones. I want to bring in characters you haven't heard about in a while. It's kind of fun. We always tend to, as we preach out of the New Testament, when there's so many great lessons we can learn from the Old Testament. It is a complete volume. Please don't be one of those Christian people that believe since the New Testament has come and Christ has completed it that we don't have to even look at the Old anymore. There's so much wisdom. God has shown Himself complete through all of the books of the Bible. So you need to reference them and read all of them. Nothing is any more important than anything else. We just get to hear the end of the story at the end. But sometimes the best way we can learn is by learning how they got there. And so you need to always reference the Old Testament. Well, again, we've got an overall passage, and I want you to, if you can, over time, see if you can memorize this verse, because it's a great one. And I want you to say it with me. Romans 15, verses 1 and 2. Here we go. Now we who are strong have an obligation to bear the weaknesses of those without strength, and not to please ourselves. Each one of you must please his neighbor for his good, to build him up. This is the kind of people we need to be. And again, I'm taking this a little tiny bit out of context. The whole concept here, we are strong because we have Christ in us. That's why we're strong. You're not strong on your own. You have no ability in yourself. Everything that you're given is given by Christ. But because we are strong, because we have Christ in us, we have the ability to help those who may be growing in Christ, as we learned in Romans 14 this morning. Or we may have the ability to encourage that person who doesn't know Christ to hear the message for the first time. But the only way we can do that is through Christ. But at this point, I want you to know that. So as we share this message, you all are now the strong ones. At least those in this room that know Christ. If you haven't, I hope by the end of the time, you got it figured out and you're part of the troop and part of the army ready to fight. But at this point, if you know Christ, you're the strong ones. You have an obligation to help those around you who are not strong. Those who may need to be encouraged and brought along, or those who don't know the Lord at all. It may be that you're the one to share that message. There's some of the best stories ever written have great friends as main characters. And again, I am one of those. Sadly enough, the world has turned it where you've got two guys that are friends. It has to be some sexual connotation. No, a great guy can have another great guy as a friend. The same thing for ladies. There's nothing more powerful than having a relationship with a woman who's a friend that you can talk to and confide in and be encouraged by. These are good things. It doesn't have to be a sexual connotation. Sadly, the world turns those into that. But there's some of the best stories ever told have two male characters who just really love each other. They're going to sacrifice. They'll give everything they can for that person because that's what true love is. And I can love a man as a platonic relationship and to give him and encourage him. My brother-in-law does that for me. He does so many great things for me because he loves me. We were friends before we were relatives. And so at this point, we've got a long relationship of just being very close friends. You need to have someone like that in your life. But some of the great stories that we've ever seen, there isn't anything more powerful than a good friend. And I'm going to give you a few names, and let me see if you know what book it's from. Okay, the first one I'm going to make a lot of people really happy, or at least a few. Darcy and Bingley. What's it from? Pride and Prejudice. There was a raucous game of Pride and Prejudice going on the other night at a gathering we were at. It was all kinds of fun. The ladies were really getting after it. But you see in this that if I know the story well enough, Bingley actually listens to Darcy for long enough that he's actually not going to at one point marry Jane. Now, he comes back to his senses, and he does marry her, but he loved his friend well enough to at least listen to him when he was trying to. And eventually what I hear is that they married sisters, and so they become brothers. Am I right? Am I close on that? Okay. All of you Pride and Prejudice aficionados out there, who would Frodo and Sam, what book would that be? Lord of the Rings. Okay? You see, if you've watched the movies or read the books, and I've read the books, I had trouble with the first one. I read all the other three. Just had trouble with the first one. But got through those, you see that they're willing to sacrifice everything they have for the other. If one's weak, whatever it takes, I'll give my life to get you where you need to be. This is the kind of relationship we are to have. We are to be these kind of people for one another, and we're not good at it. Now, I'm saying as an overall average, we're not good at it. There are some of you that are extremely sacrificial, and I've seen that the way you've dealt with me and other people in this church and other people in the neighborhood. I know that. But as a whole, as a church universal, the word Catholic, I love the word Catholic because in Latin it means universal. We are all one big happy fellowship under God's kingdom. We all love everyone together, and we're to strive to be that kind of people. Let's again, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. You know what that's from. I mean, Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. All these my daughter's read 1,000 times, and she loves them. But you see, even though Sherlock Holmes is the prima donna, you see that he will many times sacrifice for Dr. Watson, even in putting himself in peril. You see that. Let me give you these names. Jane and Helen. What's that from? Who is it? So I can't hear. Jane Eyre. Whoever said it, you're on it. Jane and Helen. My daughter's read this so many times I had to buy her extra books. It's a great book with two ladies that really do care about each other and love each other. Will sacrifice for the other. What about Anne and Diane? Anybody know that one? Anne of Green Gables. You're right on it. Again, book I have not read, but what I hear, the characters are very strong. They're sacrificial. They love each other well enough. Now, this has got 4 ladies. Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy. Little Women. Here we go. Some of you know that one. Again, I don't know. I haven't read the book. My daughter's read them all. My wife's read them all. But from what I hear, they will do anything to ensure that the best comes out in these ladies. And so that's a powerful relationship. You need to have someone in your life like that. I told my wife many times that, I love you, babe, but you need to find a good friend. Let's find somebody that you can invest some time into, and someone that'll maybe understand more what you're talking about than I do, because I'm not getting it right now. I love you. Please understand I love you, but I don't get it. That's a good thing. But the same thing she does for me. I once in a while I just need to go talk to a guy. Let me just grumble for a few minutes. He'll pat me on the back. We'll go out and do whatever guys do. Okay? You need that kind of relationship. The sacrifice of the 2 or the 3 or the 4, these people's lives are enriched and they're saved through their circumstances. Today we're going to see one of the most sacrificial, beautiful, and heroic friendships in the Bible. Beautiful story. If you've not read it, I hope you do. Read it to your kids. We're in the book of Ruth. Open this up. Beautiful story and a heroic story of 2 women who love each other enough to do whatever it takes to follow God's plan for their lives. Who wrote the book of Ruth? No one really knows. We don't have any writer to it. We know Ruth probably didn't write it. We know it's during the time of David's reign, generally that time, when the judges ruled Israel. So we're talking early on. The book of Ruth covers an 11-year period. We don't get to see all that because they kind of quickly abridge it and get into the important parts. But it's a beautiful, beautiful story. The theme of Ruth is redemption as it relates to the kinsman redeemer. And I'm going to show you and tell you what a kinsman redeemer is in a few minutes. So hang on there. We're in the book of Ruth, chapter 1. We're going to go through the whole book. I like to preach 3 or 4 verses, not 4 chapters. But we got a long way to go in a short time to get there. So please stand with me as we honor God's word. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. It says, during the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons to live in the land of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. The names of the two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the land of Moab and settled there. Naomi's husband Elimelech died, and she was left with her two sons. Her sons took her Moabite women as their wives. One was named Orpah, one was named Ruth. After they lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And Naomi was left with her two children without her husband. Let's pray. Dear Lord, you are good, and I thank you for this time. Lord, I thank you for this beautiful book of Ruth. I thank you for the opportunity we have to have relationships that are tight and close with friends, Lord. And I ask that this morning we learn what you would have us to learn. We say this in your name. Amen. Please be seated. Excuse me. Let me give you a little bit of backstory here on the history and the time, because we're starting at Ruth right at the beginning. It's a history when women without a husband didn't have much hope. Now, today we're blessed because everything is a little different than it was back then. Women can be just as powerful. There are many. There's a handful of billionaire women on Forbes' top 100. I mean, very, very powerful women out there who could do mighty things. Some of them running for president. What a blessing that we have all of this opportunity in America today. But in this time, during the time of the judges, a woman without a man had no hope. They couldn't even own the land that was in their family's line. If they're the only one, they had to have a husband to be able to use the land and to manage it. If it was their families, they couldn't produce food on it, even if it was in their line, and it should have been theirs. It went to the husband and his side. And so the women couldn't use the land. They couldn't manipulate the land. They couldn't take possession of the land without a man. At this point, they couldn't do the physical labor, and it was a very tough time where you would make a decent amount of money. They couldn't do the physical labor in the fields because predominantly that was male-driven. So we've got women who can't really do anything at this point. They're relying on a husband. They're relying on sons. And again, it's not that way today. I'm giving you history from back then. But at some point, they maybe could clean for someone else. They could cook for someone else. But they wouldn't get paid enough really to live. So they were really at the mercy of everyone around them. And it was a sad, sad story. If you've read my first book, one of my characters is a woman like this. You were endeared to this person because you see the plight that she's having to go through because of the life that she's in. But this is what we see. Usually when women without family, the way they would get by is they would glean the fields, okay, if people were nice enough to let them. What happens is you've got this landowner with a lot of land. He's got a lot of hay or wheat or whatever it is or stuff that they're growing that they can eat. And as they come through and take it all off, anything that's left on the ground, which was part of the rules of Israel, if anything was left on the ground, they didn't get it up. It was at that point for those who couldn't provide for themselves could come through and take it up and provide for themselves. They could eat. Again, if they left enough wheat, then maybe they could make some bread and continue to exist that way. But it was a very difficult time. Their existence was dark, without much future. They didn't live very long. The minute they couldn't get out and glean, if, let's say they became physically infirmed, they're now pretty much destined to death. So it was a very, very sad time and a dark time. Israel did a good job of trying to take care of their people as well as they could. They had rules and regulations set in place to allow ladies to do these things. And the owners had to allow them to do it. But the owners could do a good job of picking those fields clean if they wanted to make sure no one was there. Okay, so at this point, their existence is dark. Therefore, Jewish people, they designated a way back for women in this situation. If you're a woman, and again, you get a guy out there working in the fields, a guy gets in something, he gets run over by something, a horse kicks him, he dies. It happened quite a bit. They had what they call the kinsman redeemer. Now, this was a male relative. It had to be a male. It could be a brother, an uncle, a grandfather, someone like that, who, according to various laws of the Pentateuch, had the privilege or responsibility to act on behalf of a relative who was in trouble or danger. So a kinsman redeemer could redeem someone back, essentially from death, is what we're going to see. And so if you had one of those, there was a few processes you had to go through, but you could be restored. So that's a little bit of background information. Okay? The Hebrew term for a kinsman redeemer is a goel. It's a very powerful word in the Hebrew. If this man were given the opportunity, now often his wives wouldn't allow it. They didn't want any other women coming into the household. But if he were given the opportunity and he wanted to deal with that situation, he could marry or graft these women into his family, therefore bringing them back. This redeemer concept of the kinsman redeemer is compared to Christ. He is our brother who had no obligation to restore us. He did not have to give his life. He shouldn't have had to give his life, but he did. And therefore, he brings us back from death. So many times you'll hear this concept, kinsman redeemer. Certain circles will say it more than others. But comparing it to Christ, we only see it a couple times actually worked out in the Old Testament. And this is one of them. So it's a very powerful story. Let's get into it, see if we can understand what's going on. So the first thing I want you to know this morning about a hero is that a hero is loyal. Loyalty is a beautiful thing. We don't have much loyalty to our jobs, to our bosses, to our family anymore. Sadly enough, the whole concept's watered down. I don't think most men, and again, I consider, I enjoy loyalty as a guy, but I don't see it happening too much. You know, ladies, the same thing. We don't understand it. We move on whatever's best for us at the time. Sometimes we need to be thinking about what's better for the community, what's better for the country. As Americans, we tend to vote for our pocketbooks. We don't vote necessarily for what's best for America. And that's going to be the downfall of us. It's coming sooner than later. But a hero's loyal. This story begins here with a woman named Naomi, who is from Israel. She's from Israel. She's moved to the land of Moab with her husband. But she loses her husband and her 2 sons in this foreign land. So she's not even in her homeland around her family. Very, very dark situation. The 2 sons had married 2 local girls who aren't from Israel. So one way or another, the family's going to be split up. Either they're all going to stay together, which means Naomi, is not with her family members, or if they all move back, now the 2 daughters-in-laws are now leaving their homeland. So we've got a problem. We've got 3 men who have died, 3 women who are grieving, and 3 women without hope. Even though Naomi has rights to land and property, she can't access them and therefore can't pass them on to her daughters. You see the issue. We've got trouble. So let's go on to verse 8 here. She said to them, because she is very sacrificial, she understands her plight. This is Naomi's problem and not her daughters-in-law's. They can go back home. Here's what she says to them. Each of you go back to your mother's homes. May the Lord show faithful love to you as you have shown to the dead and to me. Again, they have been respectful. They loved their husbands. They've loved her. They spent 10 years together with her. They love each other, but she understands, you have done all that you owe me. You owe me nothing else. Go back to your homes and you can start over. These are young women. They're not old. They may be in their mid-20s, upper 20s at this point. They can get married again. Whereas Naomi's got a few more years on her. For you 40-year-old ladies, she was an old one at that point. Okay? And so I'm not making a joke, but at 40, back at that time, that was getting fairly old. Again, they worked very hard. Lives were short. They didn't eat as healthily as we did today. And so she's not got necessarily the same opportunities that Orpah and Ruth do. And so she knows that. So she's wanting to move on. She tries and send them back to their mother's home. Yet this story is really about the one daughter-in-law. Both ladies, Orpah and Ruth, say they're going to stay with Naomi, but eventually Orpah goes back on home. She's going to start her life again. She spent time here. She's going to try to make it again. Naomi encourages Ruth to leave, just like her sister-in-law does, but she is hero and loyal. Now look at verses 16 to 18. But Ruth replied, do not persuade me to leave you or go back not to follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. You may have been to a wedding or something where you've heard these words. These words are used a lot at a wedding. Very powerful words. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh punish me, and do so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. How many of you have a friendship like that? I mean, most marriages aren't that tight anymore, sadly enough. Let alone to have just a daughter-in-law. Again, sometimes those relationships are strained. These 2 ladies love each other. Definitely love each other, and will do anything for each other. Again, we see this. Ruth totally understood, the daughter-in-law understood that without the hand of God, they were essentially going to die together. There's no way out of this thing. They may make it a while, but they have no hope out of this situation. It is no way to raise yourself out of where they are. They can't get out. There's no way. It's not like inventing something here in America and we can make it and get a patent on it and sell 1 billion of them and, you know, it makes us $1 million overnight. They had no opportunity like that. Their destiny and their future was to essentially maybe glean the fields. Hopefully relying on the kindness of someone else. What happens when that kindness runs out? They're not eating. they don't have a place to live. This is what they knew, and both of them understood that. Both ladies were grieving the loss of their husbands, but Ruth couldn't leave Naomi alone. Beautiful relationship. You don't see stories like this. Read these old stories to your children, these Old Testament stories. So powerful. They need to understand what loyalty looks like. They need to understand what true sacrifice is, because in America we don't have it. Everyone, our poorest in America are 10 times richer than some of the poorest places in the world. When everybody's got a car and a television, to say we're poor is a difficult situation. Now, there are those that are having difficult troubles. I understand that. There's a small percentage. But for America to consider this area poor, when you go to Bangladesh, they make $25 a year at best. They're eating out of slums and trash heaps. Not too many of our people are doing that. We have the opportunity. We bring our people out of this. And so we see this. It's a beautiful relationship. We need to strive for that. Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die. Again, we should be saying that to our spouses. There's no separation. When I do marriage counseling, I said there's no concept of divorce. Just ignore it. You make it happen. You fight through it unless there is something that you have to deal with that the Bible is very clear. Here's your exit. And there are instances for divorce in the Bible. Understand that. I understand that. But you want to do everything you can to stay tight, to love each other, if it's at all possible. Naomi's possibilities are low. She's older. But Ruth can marry again. Yet Ruth has resigned her fate to be that of a woman with no male protection. Because of her love and loyalty to Naomi, Ruth will essentially struggle and possibly die with her. Are you that kind of loyal person? Are you that loyal to God? I mean, He's the end product here. Would you be willing to give everything up for Him? Let's say God sent you to Africa. That's always the word we always throw out, Africa. Sent you to Africa. It's so scary. Would you do that? Maybe you're not even in a position you could even think about it. Be willing to do what God says. Be willing, be sacrificial, be open for it. There's a cartoon I used to love. Now, I liked the cartoon version, not the real version. It was called The Tick. I don't know if any of you have ever read The Tick. I know probably Nathan has. But Arthur is his loyal sidekick. The Tick is just so funny. He's just so witty. Not meaning to be. He just spoke that way. Wears this big blue outfit with antennas. And Arthur's this little round guy with who looks kind of like a moth. And Arthur is always loyal, even when Tick obviously didn't save the day, which most of the time he didn't. Arthur ended up saving the day about every time. The Tick would take credit for it like he's the big one and he did all these great things. But Arthur just allowed him to do that. He was loyal to him, even though it would frustrate him once in a while. He would sacrifice for the Tick so that he could be just with him. He enjoyed the relationship and he allowed Tick to take all the credit. This is the kind of people we need to be. Does it really matter whether you win or not? If you're doing what God's called you to do, you're going to be loyal and you're going to be sacrificial. You're going to love everyone else around you. So we must be loyal. So a hero's loyal. I hope you're a loyal person. If you're not, figure out what that means. Get you out of Webster's dictionary and start researching a little bit. Figure out what loyalty means, and do you have loyalty anywhere in your life? Anything to anyone, to anything. So the second thing, a hero will listen to wisdom. Saying at this point, Naomi and Ruth, they leave the land of Moab. Naomi says, okay, well, if you're going to stay with me, I'm going home. I'm going back to where I know. Moab is not my land. It's not my area. I don't know these people. I do have family and land in the area of Israel, the town of Bethlehem. So they go back to the land of Bethlehem, which is Naomi's home. But now Ruth leaves her homeland. She's leaving everything that she knows. She's leaving her buried husband out there. She's leaving her parents and her other sisters and brothers, all her siblings, to travel to a place she has no information about. The possibility for women at this time was very, very small. They could glean the fields. It was the best they do. The field owners, if they would allow that, they would let them glean. So at this point, they're poor. They have no way out. And so Ruth goes to Naomi and says, will you let me glean the fields? Now, at this point, you've essentially gone to the lowest of the low. The poor, the poverty-stricken, the ones with no hope, no background, no education, they're the ones who are out there gleaning the fields. So for Ruth, who I know at this point Naomi was fairly well off, her husband was an influential man, to go from that kind of a lifestyle, passing it on to her sons, the sons giving their wives a beautiful, healthy, nice, prosperous lifestyle to go to where now you're living in a hut, gleaning fields for food. Can you imagine Naomi's heart? Can you imagine? This is not what she wanted. She feels responsible for Ruth. You married my son and my son's dead. You're now mine. But you're asking if you can glean the fields. Can you imagine that? What a sacrificial thing. Ruth will do anything it can to take care of her mother-in-law. So she allows her to do this. She lets her, okay, if this is what you want to do, you go do it. So Ruth's out picking, and here's where our kinsman redeemer comes in. A guy named Boaz. He's a godly man who owns lots and lots of land, very, very wealthy. Loans all the fields over here as far as you can see. And he's out there coming to see the guys because they're out there working the fields. And all of a sudden he sees this little person out there, way out there. Who is that person? Who's she? He could just tell something about her. She's different. She doesn't look like the other ladies. She doesn't carry herself the same way. She may still have the trappings of the lifestyle she had. She may have a nicer coat on or cloak or whatever they would have worn, and better robe on. She's carrying herself. She's keeping herself nicer because that's what she comes from. But he starts asking questions. Guys, who is she? Where did she come from? What's her deal? Again, she's beautiful, but what's more important about her? She is respectful. She's humble. She's grace-filled. And so at this point, when he speaks to her, he sees something very different in her. She is beautiful, not just on the outside, but in all aspects. Ladies, is that you? Men, are you not just handsome and rugged, but are you honorable and righteous when people see you? Or are you one thing on the outside and something else on the inside? There's nothing more beautiful than a lady who carries herself with grace. Something we don't know very much of today. You know, you can go in the high schools and see the way the girls carry themselves. That's not going to change necessarily when they get 22 to 25, 30. They're going to continue those patterns. Ladies, raise your ladies right. Men, raise your men to be honorable and righteous. We need to carry these qualities on. So Boaz sees this. He tells her, he's already enamored with her. He thinks something special about this lady. She is not like the other ladies out here. No, she's in the same situation, but she is different. She's been trained differently. She's been raised differently. He says, don't you go gleaning anywhere else. This is your field right here. This is a good one. And he tells the men around her, well, it was a sad situation. The men would often take advantage of the women in the fields. He says, any of you touch her, you're responsible to me. You will not touch this one. You will stay away from her. You should have done it for all of them. But he protects this one especially. You will not even get around her. And what he does is he also says, you're going to leave a little bit. Let that truck, let the back of the truck, just let some of it fall out. You don't have to bring it all in. Again, he's getting paid by the weight of that stuff that he sells at market. He's willing to let a lot of it go off that way. She's well taken care of. An honorable man, a righteous man. He allows her to drink from his water jars. Anytime you want, honey, come on, there's some water here. If you want, I got some food. Guys always got food over here. Guys will stay away from you. You get some food. He wants to take care of her. He sees something different. Whether he loved her at this point, I don't know. But he wanted to honor who she was. I know that part of him. He's too godly of a man not to say, you are special, and I want to keep you that way. Sometimes when we get into a different situation in life, we will lower ourselves to wherever we are. No matter where you are, stay up here. And then maybe draw others up with you. Carry yourself as if you're a queen or a king, no matter if you're in the dirt down here with everyone else. And God will honor that. She wonders why he's so kind. He goes to chapter 2. We're trekking through the Bible here. 2 verse 11. Boaz answered her, everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me. How you left your father and mother in the land of your birth, and how you came to a people you didn't previously know. That's why he's so enamored with her. He's a wealthy guy. He probably said, follow her. Who is she? Give me some information on this lady. She's extremely special. Why is she so special? Why is she not like every other woman that comes to this field? Something different about her. He finds out that she's been extremely loyal to her mother-in-law. You've got to respect that. You've got to respect that. How would you not lift someone up who is sacrificing essentially their life for someone else? This is a hero, and we need to be more like this. So, at this point, she understands. He understands what's going on with her. Boaz offers her food, tells his men to give extra grain, to allow her to pick it up. It's a kind man and a relationship put together by God. God will be blessing someone at this point who is not from Israel. You know, we see all throughout the Old Testament God protected his people. But occasionally there was someone special that he needed. Someone special that would come along, that would add to the beauty and the culture of his people. And he's going to take care of them. So at this point, this is a kind of relationship put together. Well, Ruth comes home and tells Naomi what's happened. Okay? This guy's been so nice to me. She just comes home. I don't know what he was. He's just really nice. He let me drink from his water. He let me have extra food. Look at all this. This is a great thing. Now go to verse 20. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living or the dead." Naomi continued, "The man is a close relative. He's one of our family redeemers." She remembers that this guy can get him out of this situation if it's in God's will. Bless God for even letting me remember this. It had been put off. She had heard his name, but she hadn't thought about him for years. Naomi knows Boaz. She knows this. So in the story, as we continue on, Ruth gleans the fields all harvest time. Fields are now empty. There's nothing else there. And so she's been working all this time. But as we see this, under the protection of Boaz, she's well taken care of. The family's doing well, but Naomi gets a plan. Now, how many of you ladies are matchmakers? I know my wife likes to play that game once in a while. Oh, this person would be so great with this person. Oh, but he's so good. How many of you are guys? You may play the same game. I'm not putting it off on ladies. But never. What was that? Look at that. But understand, it's fun when we can bring people together. We see commonalities. So Naomi gets an idea. She's got a plan. Again, she's trying to work it. Now, here's what she says in chapter 3. We're trekking through. Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I find security for you so that you will be taken care of? Now, isn't Boaz our relative? Haven't you been working with his female servants? This evening he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfumed oil, and wear your best clothes." That always starts off well for us guys. "Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let the man know you're there until he has finished eating and drinking." He's been fed. He's had a good day. He's kind of relaxed. He got some things done. Now, when he lies down, notice the place where he's lying. Go and uncover his feet and lie down next to him. Then he will explain to you what you should do. Naomi, at this point, has become a marriage arranger for Ruth. She's going to try to work this thing. She's got her plan. She's working the plan. She knows exactly how it is. Now, understand, Boaz is probably Naomi's age. He could be mid-40s, running up to 50. Ruth is fairly young. She's in her 20s. But that's not uncommon at this time. Again, they would often have 20 to 25-year gaps between the male and the female. And so we see this. It's not uncommon. But again, he's always a little bit concerned with it as we go. At this time, weddings were arranged by the family. And since Ruth has no other family but Naomi, Naomi's going to start arranging it. She's going to work this thing out. Ruth understands the Jewish customs, but because she is not a Jew, she does not have to follow them. She doesn't have to. But she's going to listen to wisdom when she hears it. Okay, I trust you, Naomi, with my life because I've given my life to you. I've sacrificed everything I could have had because I love you that way. If you're telling me to do this thing, which whether or not she was comfortable with it, or I don't know, she listens. She listens to wisdom. Children, listen to your parents because they've got a lot more wisdom than you do. Adults, listen to your parents. My parents still, anytime I have a big thing, who do I call? Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad, what do you think? They have so much wisdom because they've lived through it. Again, she's wise. She follows this wisdom. Do you listen to wisdom? I've had people leave churches and understand I am the most passive. I want everybody to be happy. I don't want to get involved in your lives. I don't. I want to be able to teach you and celebrate with you. But once in a while, I've kind of got to remind you of something maybe that's not best for you. This isn't helping you, or get involved in a situation that I don't want to. And I've had people leave the church because they wonder, who am I to do that? Kind of the pastor of the church. I have that leadership responsibility, whether I want it or not. Please understand, I never wanted or sought any of the positions I've been in. God throws me out front when I'm happy being somewhere in a closet doing his work. He just does that. But once in a while I may have to, and I hope it never happens. But if it does, will you respect me in the position I have? I've had several people leave when I say, okay, now you're going to have to listen to me. You've been doing this for the last year and a half, and I've been patient. I've been praying God would do it. You're going to have to listen to me because this will stop. Not in this church. Who are you to say this to me? I'm your elder by 30 years. Okay? Well, you should have been smarter 30 years ago to figure this thing out. I didn't say that to them. Okay? Thought it, but didn't say it. Pretty good in my ministerial work. But will you listen to leaders? Will you listen to the elders if they come to you? The deacons. Again, these are godly men. We have leaders all over this place, godly women, who may have to say, you know what, I want more for you. I love you. What about this? Have you thought about this? Would you listen to that wisdom? Or would you just buck up and head out? That's where most of us are today. And there's so much we can learn from each other. That's why we come together. Not because you're getting smarter today. You come together so you can be encouraged and lifted up by your friends around you. That's what's so great about church. No, I cannot get the same relationship I get with God out at the lake or on the mountaintop. Those are good experiences. But God has called us to come together with His people, to celebrate and to commiserate and to be encouraged when things are tough. That's what wisdom is. Do you have wisdom to listen to when it comes? I hope. So we see a hero is loyal. She is. A hero will listen to wisdom. Ruth does. And a hero will lift others up. Lifting them up. Thor's a great character in comic book realm. If you haven't seen the new Avengers movie, I wish they left a couple words out of it. That would have been great. He is the Norse god of thunder and lightning and carries a hammer called Mjolnir. In the newest Avengers movie, there's a part where the hammer's just sitting on a glass table. And at this point, all the Avengers are coming up trying to lift that hammer off, thinking they're cool enough. Well, the problem with his hammer, it's an enchanted hammer. And only those who are worthy can lift it. Are you worthy enough to lift others up? Are you that way? If you read the comic books, and I had to do a little referencing, there's been a handful of people who lifted that hammer. Captain America at one point, Hulk, Red Hulk, Conan, Superman, Wonder Woman, even Magneto, and I don't know how he did it. I'll have to read that comic book at some point. But to lift the hammer, you need to be worthy. We must be worthy to lift others up beyond ourselves. You know what? I've worked with pastors who had to be the smartest guy in the room, even though everyone in the room was smarter than they were. I've worked with those kind of guys. I'm happy if I'm the dumbest guy in the room and got intelligent people around me, because all I am is lifted up by them. I want all of you using your gifts because you're better at what you're doing than I am. I want you to be the smart ones. I want you to be the strong ones. I'm encouraged and dragged behind with you. What a great possibility, yet we have to be the best and the smartest. Lift others up to be that kind of people. Ruth does what Naomi says. Back to our story. She goes to Boaz. She uncovers his feet and lays down next to him right at his feet. Now, understand there's a lot of talk about what feet means. Okay? It doesn't have to mean something sexual. If you look at a lot of theologians, they will say, oh, it means this, and feet really means something other than non-feet. Okay? Sometimes a foot's just a foot. You know, we tend to read the Bible, and we make everything to be into something else. Oh, a tree, that tree doesn't mean tree. Tree means, 48 other. No, it's a tree, and it meant a tree. At some point, I will get into, I went to Israel for about 3 weeks years ago. I never saw the Bible the same way, because when you're reading the passages and seeing what Jesus is seeing while he's talking about it, not very much metaphor there. He's being pretty clear, but this means this. Now, can I say that feet doesn't mean foot? No, I can't. But for the most part, ask me, Naomi is saying, just let him get to sleep, and when you uncover his feet, he's going to wake up because he gets cold. You know, I know I can have a very little bit if it's in the cold winter. If I put something over my feet, I'm much more warm. I don't know why that is. I guess our heat goes down our feet. But that's what we see happening here. She uncovers his feet. A couple hours into it, he wakes up. Whoa, I'm cold. Well, who's this? What's this lady doing here? Who is she? This is what we have. Again, the Bible doesn't have trouble dealing with sexual aspects. Read the book of Song of Solomon. If you're saying the Bible likes to cover stuff up, the Bible has no trouble dealing with sexual matters. So they could have very easily said something else here, and that's not an issue because they've dealt with the topic in the Old Testament plenty of times. So you ask me if foot means a foot, but we don't know. But he wakes up, and they talk a little bit. They kind of work a plan, and he gives Naomi some grain. He gives Ruth the grain to take back to Naomi. This is where the kinsman redeemer really comes in. So Boaz at this point goes to the city gate to find a closer relationship to Naomi. Now he can marry Ruth outright. But what he wants to do is get several things. He wants to knock down 2 dominoes at once. If he can redeem Naomi, he's got Ruth's loyalty and love for the rest of his life. Look how easy that is. Because of Ruth's love for Naomi, she's not going to leave Naomi out on a lurch. She's not. And the kinsman-redeemer relationship goes to Naomi because she's the direct relation. So she has to be redeemed to bring Ruth along. He can marry Ruth, but that kind of still leaves Naomi out on a lurch. So what he does is he goes to the city gate. This is where all the guys work out all the problems. It's where there's always the old guys go down to the restaurant, or I've been going to the airport a little bit. You'll see the guys just around there talking. It's fun to hear what they talk about, and they got always some great stories. They go to the city gate to do this, and they do all the financial aspects of the work of the city at the city gate. So he's looking for anyone who may be a closer relationship to Naomi than he is. He's like a second cousin. He needs to find that first cousin first. So he does find one guy, and they wrestle a little bit, and trying to work it out. He finds out that the guy does want Naomi's stuff. Because Naomi has land, she just can't access it. The man has to take the land. And so what happens is this guy finds out, okay, financially I'll lose some other inheritances if I take her land on, so you can have her. So at this point, it's a clear road all the way to the end. Again, so what happens here? He ends up redeeming Naomi, the kinsman redeemer. He redeems Naomi from death, giving her all the rights of her land. He is grafted into his, but she has the right of her family to run this land, and he ends up marrying Ruth. Now listen to this part in chapter 4. Such a great story. We could take weeks to go through this book. We trek through it in 30 minutes here, but look at this. Verses 13 to 15. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. What a great ending. My wife always likes the endings where you see the grandkids. She wants to see the grandkids. They did not just that they're married and they have kids, but I want to see the grandkids too. This is what we see happening here. The story ends so well. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he was intimate with her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has not left you without a family redeemer today. May his name become well known in Israel." So Naomi is lifted up because of Boaz's sacrifice and Ruth's sacrifice and the opportunity that they've had to come together. So Ruth now has a child she didn't have before, part of the status of this time. Naomi is now just beaming with the greatness of her God. And then we get to move on. He will renew your life and sustain you in old age. Indeed, your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. How many did she have? She had 2, and she lost them both. This daughter-in-law, who's not even a blood relation, married in, was 3 times better than the 2 sons she had because of that relationship and that sacrifice. And the whole world at this point knew it. This is the kind of person Ruth was. She lifted everyone up. So we see this kinsman redeemer. We know how Christ works. We are dead in our sin. Christ redeems us back. He's the brother that didn't have to. And we see that Boaz here, Naomi could have been left in obscurity. But what he did is he redeemed Naomi, then he marries Ruth. Everybody wins. What a beautiful, beautiful story this thing is. Go home and read it. There's so much to it. We find out that this son that Ruth has is the father of Jesse, which is the father of David. If Ruth hadn't have been obedient, if she hadn't have been loyal, if she hadn't have been wise, Christ's line would have never come about. The greatest king of Israel would not have been there. 2 generations later, David is born and becomes the greatest king Israel ever had. Because of Ruth's sacrifice, because of her loyalty, because of her love. By Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, Jesus' line is formed. By Ruth listening to Naomi's wisdom, Ruth was blessed, and so was Naomi. Everyone was brought back from the brink. God can do that for you today. You're on the brink if you don't have Christ. You don't have to be there. He's already worked it out. He's already redeemed you. You just have to take it. There's not a single thing you do except accept this beautiful gift. Naomi could have rejected it. No, I don't want you to redeem me. How foolish would that have been? I'd rather die in a dirt hut than be back to the wealth that God has given me that is rightfully mine. God has made us kings and queens, and yet we live like paupers. It's time to stop. Stand up for what God has for you. Live like that king that he wants you to. Ruth was given a new family and a life. Naomi becomes a grandmother, something she wasn't before, part of the status of the life that God gives us. By Ruth being kind and gracious and loving, Naomi was restored and redeemed. Had anyone at any point in this thing not listened, Ruth stayed home with Orpah. I don't want to go to Bethlehem. Naomi not being kind and giving wisdom. Boaz just all of a sudden one day not looking out in the field, not seeing that girl. Any point it would have broken down, David wouldn't have come, which is the direct line of Jesus, which is the salvation, the hope for us. So we need to thank Ruth today for her being willing to do what she was called to do. What are you called to do that is going to affect people lines down the road? I mean, you may think, I'm just nothing. I'm just an average guy or a girl. Yet God has something great He's destined for you that you won't ever know about. Probably Ruth did not see the line of David coming. She didn't, but she was part of it. You don't know what's coming 100 years from now that you are directly responsible to be part of. Do you understand how obedience matters? It's just not a joke. Obedience is everything in the Christian walk. And it's nothing we want to do. Are you an obedient people?